Welcome to our channel BritNews Update.
Hi there.
Today's we have quite a stack of news, and it all seems to point towards how the recent UK spending review could directly impact your finances, your daily life even.
That's right. We've got the source materials you sent over, and, well, we're going to do a deep dive into them, try and figure out what's most important for you.
Okay, great. Let's unpack this then. We hear a lot about budgets, obviously, but what exactly is this spending review? Is it different?
Yeah, it is. Money Week clarifies it's quite distinct, actually. It's not typically where taxes get changed or totally new policies are announced.
Ah, right.
Its main job is setting the budgets for government departments, for the next 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
and outlining plans for infrastructure investment.
So it's more about how the existing government money gets divided up.
Pretty much, yeah, how the pie gets sliced, you could say.
Right.
And it's significant because, as Money Week also notes, this is the first one like this since 2015 that isn't, totally dominated by the pandemic.
Right, so it'll return to maybe more strategic thinking. And it's led by the Chancellor and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
Exactly. It's the government setting out its spending priorities. And BBC News has helpfully laid out 7 key areas where these decisions might actually touch your life.
Okay, 7 key impacts. Let's jump into those. First up, your job,
hmm
especially, I guess, if you work in the public sector.
That's a big one. While some areas, places like defense, the NHS, science, and tech are actually seeing significant funding increases, BBC News details cuts elsewhere.
Cuts. Whereabouts?
Well, looking over the next 3 years, funding is set to decrease annually for the Home Office by 1.7%, the Foreign Office quite sharply by 6.9%. A lot of that is aid spending, apparently. And
Yep.
then the Department for Transport down 5%, Environment 2.7%, and Business and Trade 1.8%.
Even 1 or 2% sounds like it could put pressure on jobs or pay in those big departments.
It certainly could, yeah. But on the flip side, BBC News does highlight long-term job creation linked to some investments, like the Sizewell C nuclear plant project.
Ah, yes, I saw that mentioned.
Potential for 10,000 direct jobs, they say, and, thousands more in the supply chain.
Interesting contrast. Okay, moving beyond jobs, what about families? Something about free school meals.
Yes, this is quite a big change potentially. From September 2026, the plan is for all children in England whose parents are on universal credit to get free school meals.
All children on UC. That sounds like a wider group than currently.
It is much wider than the current setup in England, which has that £7,400 household income threshold. And BBC News points out, importantly, that many families on universal credit are actually in work, so this helps them too.
And it varies across the UK, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. London and Wales already give free meals to all primary kids. Scotland does it for the first 5 primary years, plus others getting the Scottish Child Payment. And Northern Ireland has its own rules, based on certain benefits and an income threshold around £15,000.
Right. Okay, shifting gears a bit. What about my local area? Parks, libraries, that sort of thing? Is there money for that?
There is. Some money is allocated for renewal projects, think parks, pools, libraries, in about 350 communities. But BBC News also picked up on something quite important regarding council tax.
Oh, it's that.
Well, the review documents themselves seem to strongly suggest that future council tax rises are sort of, well, expected to boost the spending power of local authorities.
Ah, so the funding increase for local government might rely partly on us paying more council tax.
That seems to be the implication. It could mean better social care or services, sure, but potentially also higher local costs, council tax itself, maybe parking permits, garden waste bins.
I see. And the devolved nations.
Yes, BBC News detailed the allocations for 2026-29. It's $52 billion for Scotland, $23 billion for Wales, and $20 billion for Northern Ireland.
Got it. Okay, transport's usually affected by these things too. Anything there?
Good news for bus users in England, actually. The £3 fare cap, which was £2 until October, has been extended. It was due to end in 2025.
Oh, that's useful. How long for?
Now it's extended to at least March 2027, though, as BBC News notes, London and Manchester have their own separate capping systems.
Right. And other transport. Trains, trams.
Yep, significant funding mentioned there, too. Money for Northern Powerhouse rail plans, tram network upgrades in places like Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, the Midlands, the Newcastle-Sunderland metro extension, and nearly £1 billion for South West train services.
Okay, quite a bit going on there. What about help for pensioners in winter? I remember changes to the winter fuel payment.
Yes, another shift here. Last winter, it was mainly for those on pension credit, so lower income pensioners. This winter, BBC News reports it's expanding in England and Wales
Expanding how?
to include all pensioners with an annual taxable income of £35,000 or less. MoneyWeek highlighted this too. The Treasury reckons it'll cost about £1.25 billion to bring that payment either £200 or £300 back to millions more pensioners.
Right, quite a widening of eligibility. Now, energy bills,
Mhm.
always a concern. The Sizewell C investment is huge, isn't it?
Massive. 17.8 billion of taxpayers' money confirmed by BBC News. And the interest on that debt, well, it's currently paid through our household bills. About £1 a month is the estimate, though that could change.
Pound a month now.
Yeah.
But what's the long-term idea?
Well, the argument from ministers is that longer term, maybe 10 years out, having that domestic nuclear power from Sizewell could significantly reduce bills compared to not building it. Stable, non-fossil fuel source.
I see, a long-term bet. Anything more immediate for energy bills?
Yeah, they also mentioned continued funding for home insulation programs to help cut energy use and bills more directly.
Good. And finally, affordable homes.
A big number here, too. BBC News reports 39 billion pounds invested in England over the next decade, specifically for affordable and social housing. That's key for the target of 1.5 million new homes by 2030. An Interactive investor adds there's another £10 billion going to Homes England. That comes from changes to the government's own financial rules, aiming to boost housing supply further.
Okay, so that's a lot of specific impacts. But pulling it all together, both MoneyWeek and Interactive investors seem to be saying, well, this all has to be paid for somehow.
Yeah, exactly. That's the crux of it. MoneyWeek points out spending needs funding, borrowing, taxes, or cuts elsewhere. And the Chancellor has these fiscal rules, remember. Not borrowing for day-to-day spending means increases generally have to come from cuts or taxes.
An Interactive investor and the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, they sound a bit concerned.
They do. The IFS director, Paul Johnson, told the BBC the government deficit is significantly higher than planned, which suggests tax rises might be needed, especially if the economy doesn't grow strongly. Interactive investor talks about a tight budget envelope where something will inevitably have to give.
Give how? Through obvious cuts or?
Could be either, or what they call stealth taxes, things like freezing income tax thresholds for longer. As wages rise, more people get pulled into higher tax brackets without the rates actually changing.
Right, that makes planning tricky. Interactive investor mentioned that too, this sort of constant state of change.
It definitely does make long-term personal finance planning harder.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean for you, the listener? It seems understanding these changes is pretty vital for, well, everything from your job security, depending on your sector.
To managing your household budget, food, transport, energy, housing costs could all be affected.
Knowing what to expect from local services, council tax,
Yeah.
and planning for the future too. Pensions, investments, like Interactive Investor highlighted.
Absolutely. Which leads to a final thought, perhaps. Considering this need for spending, but also these warnings about funding challenges and potential tax rises, how might the next big fiscal event, the autumn budget, further shape the financial decisions you need to make?
Something to definitely keep an eye on.
Indeed. Okay, that's all we have time for. Goodbye. See you in the next video.